I've always been hugely interested in women and maybe a little bit interested in the prehistoric, I guess. So overall, this movie definitely had a decent amount of potential for me, I'd say. Hi guys, so before we get into it, a quick reminder that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today. This movie basically came out in the prehistoric era. So I'm going to explain the plot of this, and in saying those words out loud, I'm hoping that I'm going to start to understand the plot a little bit better. So my reasons for doing this are twofold. So we start off in this with a couple of hunters in the jungle. They're going after tigers, lions, whatever. They're having a good time. But they come across this carving of a rhino in a tree. And at this point, their local guide freaks out and says, "Oh no, we can't go past this point. Holy lands, very bad. We cannot go on." But one of the hunters decides to go on anyway. He thinks these warnings are just poppycock. But he barely gets 20 yards past this tree before all these tribesmen with spears surround him, and they tell him that because he's strayed onto the holy lands of the white rhino or whatever, he has to be killed, basically. So they capture him and take him back to their camp. They make him watch a weird tribal dance ritual, I don't know why. And to be honest, at this point, I'm thinking to myself, where are all the women that we were promised? Come to think of it, looking back, there wasn't really much prehistoric stuff going on at this juncture either. Anyway, the tribesmen take this hunter into a building and they're just about to kill him. They raise their spears and they're about to skewer him. But where the hunter is stood, he's right next to this statue of a white rhino. And for whatever reason, he just leans out and touches the tusk of this white rhino statue as he's about to be killed. I guess maybe he just wanted something to lean on as he was about to be stabbed with the spears. I don't know. But the minute that he touches this tusk, the room around him freezes. Like all the tribesmen freeze like this. But not the hunter. He's all right. And just after this happens, like a rent appears in the side wall. Like the wall just comes apart a bit and shows him a route out to the jungle beyond. Looking back on this film, I think maybe it's actually a portal to another era from like centuries earlier, maybe back in prehistoric times, I don't know, but it looks like the same jungle that the hunters just come from. So he goes out into this jungle and he gets about 20 yards and then gets captured again, this time by a tribe of women. Yes, finally. This tribe are really strange because half of them are brunette and half of them are blonde, but the weird thing about this is that all the brunettes are the leaders, that they're in charge, they're the ones who get to enjoy the community, but all the blondes are just slaves, cooks, cleaners. It's a real two-tier society based on your hair colour, and I don't actually really understand why. It's really odd. I have read that blondes tend to be more successful in real life because they have more self-confidence. I suspect that that's not really a thing. It's just some theory that some scientists came up with. But in this film, the brunettes are on top. And I suspect the reason for that is because Martine Beswick is the star of the film and she's a brunette. So they've made the brunettes the superior ones and the blondes, the ones who just don't have anything in this society, basically. Martine Beswick was a woman who was really trying to succeed in Hollywood in the 60s. She got into a couple of James Bond films. From Russia with Love, she played one of the gypsy fighter girls, and in Thunderball, she played Paula, another minor role. She was on good terms, I think, with Terence Young, who was the director of a lot of those early Bond films, and I think Beswick was really hankering after getting one of the really big Bond girl roles, which she didn't get ultimately, but she did manage to get a lead role in a Hammer film, which is sort of like, you know, a good substitute if you're an up-and-coming actress. As long as you're getting a good Hammer film, you know, if you're getting The Mummy and you're opposite Peter Cushing, or if you're opposite Christopher Lee in Dracula, Prince of Darkness, then yeah, that's a fine alternative for not getting to be the star of a James Bond film. But unfortunately, when it came to the crapshoot of which Hammer film would land in the lap of Martine Beswick. Unfortunately, she's ended up with a real turkey, because this is not a very good film. She was in a Hammer film before this, 1,000,000 Years BC, but that was a kind of smaller part. This is her really big sort of co-starring role that she managed to get in the 60s, and it's just not a good film. I realised this very early on, around about the time that people started freezing because other people touched the tusks of white rhino statues, but I did carry on watching it with interest, because I thought to myself, even though it's bad, it might have the potential to be so bad it's good. Of course, all the women wear these really skimpy cave girl outfits, and they're all good looking enough to be supermodels, even though they shouldn't really be able to glam themselves up living in a jungle with no makeup or mirrors. Not complaining, just saying. The thrust of the movie eventually becomes, can David, the hunter character, get out of this place? But the trouble is, there's just no tension in the film, because as a viewer, I'm sat there thinking, well, does he really want to escape? I mean, it's not like these women capture him and then torture him and make his life an absolute misery. That does not happen. The queen of the community, played by Beswick, I think her name's Queen Kari, something like that. She falls in love with David almost on sight. So David actually has the opportunity to bed the queen, be her partner, and rule over the rest of the kingdom, which sounds awesome. I mean, you'd get to spend the rest of your life sleeping with somebody who looks like Martine Beswick, and you'd have all these blonde women as your slaves. It sounds great, but David, unfortunately, is a really righteous person. He wants nothing to do with the evil queen. Instead, he'd much rather fall in love with one of the blonde slaves who's really good and doesn't have a bad bone in her body. But the trouble is, this leaves him in a precarious position in terms of the society. He gets several chances to change his mind about being with the queen, and eventually she just snaps and has enough and says, right, okay, seeing as you've wronged me, I'm really going to make you suffer. I'm going to make sure that you suffer unseen horrors for the rest of your life. You will truly regret ever turning me down. And as she's sort of saying words to this effect, off to one side there's like a cave, and you can hear these anguished cries from other men who are trapped in this cave. And as a viewer, I'm thinking, oh God, what's she got lined up for David in this cave? I think he's really, really going to regret this. This sounds horrible. Then she puts him in the cave, and we find out what his nasty fate is. It's being made to work the bellows of a furnace, and he will be fed and kept in there. And okay, that's not the greatest of existence, but it's comfortable in a weird sort of way. It's not exactly the French film Martyrs, is it? It's just, yeah, it's all right. He's just working the bellows, and he's going to be fine. He'll get to live, I guess. There is a foreman type character who whips the people on the bellows, a bit like those guys from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom who just go around whipping all the kids, weirdos. I guess this foreman is, he's working for the Queen. She'll throw him a few nice things now and again if he just keeps the other men in shape, because all these men who are with David in this cave, they've all been captured previously. I don't know how, surely one at a time, otherwise they would have overwhelmed the women. They're all like on one big long link of chain, and they're surviving, but they don't have much of a life. But this foreman character who does the whipping, it's really weird, because at the start of the film, or halfway through or whatever, he's happy to whip these characters, and he looks like he's really enjoying it. But then later on, when David escapes out of his chains so we can have the finale of the movie, the foreman is now helping David with this task. Like, at some point off camera, he's gone from being this really nasty guy to being somebody who wants to help take down the Queen, but there's no explanation as to why that leap in personality has been made. There's lots of things in this film where you just go, how? Or why? Or why did you do that? You know. The only positives in this film really are, number one, there are good-looking women in this film to oogle at, as I've said. And number two, there are these really funny dances that you get to watch periodically throughout the story. They're so badly choreographed and silly that they just become really entertaining. But apart from those instances, this film is really tedious to sit through. There are so many confusing things. there's this one bizarre thing where, so there's like a tribe of men out in the woods somewhere who wear these war masks or something. For some reason, the Queen thinks that they're not actually men. They're like a group of supernatural devils, and she feels like she has to sacrifice one of her blonde slaves to this group every week or so. When they turn up, they only send one man. He just wears a mask and sits in the bushes waiting for a blonde slave to be passed out to him. But it's just really silly that the Queen would be fooled like this. And I dread to think what happens to these blondes when they're then taken off into the woods. Probably nothing nice. David certainly doesn't go off and rescue them. So let's talk a little bit about the finale of this, because if you think I've sounded confused about a lot of the film up to this point, then we're going into overdrive with the finale, because it just gets sillier and sillier. So David eventually escapes and gets back to that room where all the people were left frozen with their spears, and they then unfreeze. But they don't kill David because the statue of the white rhino collapses into dust. I can't remember if there's a reason why it collapses, it just does. And then the tribesmen all go, oh, great, yay, now we don't have to worship the white rhino anymore. So now we can just go back to being normal people. We can get the hell out of there, and the building starts coming down. I don't know why any of this stuff is happening or what the logic behind it is. But then, just when I think it's finally over, we get another scene. David ends up back at the camp of his hunters, and it turns out that no time has passed while he was off cavorting with Queen Carrie and her little kingdom. And then, just when I think finally the credits will roll, two more strange things happen. So number one, Stephen Burkoff turns up. I didn't actually realise it. I didn't realise this at the time, because he was quite a young actor, I guess, in the 60s. I only really know him from 80s films. Why he would have wanted to come and be in like one scene of this film, I can only put down to him being young and desperate for work. The other crazy thing that happens is that, so the blonde slave who David fell in love with earlier in the movie, she comes back as a different person. She's now dressed like somebody from high society or something, and she recognises David. How she got from there to there, I don't know. And how she morphed into somebody else, I don't know. But she does recognise David, and David recognises her. And this gives him a chance to finish the movie with this really sick, silly look of recognition and a smile. It's like... And then that's it. And 90 minutes of confusion just finally come to an end, and I can go and turn off my Blu-ray. I lied, it's not a Blu-ray, it's actually a DVD, and I'm very glad about that, because it means I would have spent less money on it, although I still think I spent like £9 or £10 on this. I'll keep it in my collection. I mean, I've got no intention of ever watching it again, but I will at least put it on the shelf with the other Hammer films. It makes my overall Hammer collection look bigger, I guess. There's no features on this. Why would they have bothered? You do get a nice little picture of Martine Beswick looking all sultry on a leopard skin bed. But that aside, I'm ready to move on from this one, I'm afraid, guys. So let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give it. Just the one bloody axe out of 5, and the only reason I'm giving it this is for the brilliant and beautiful Martine Beswick. But that aside, I've very little to say about this film, which is positive. So let's just move on past this one, and hopefully there will be better Hammer times to come. So I'll be back another time, I guess. I'll leave you with this one last bit of worldly wisdom. If you're ever hunting in the jungle and you come across a carving of a rhino in a tree, keep going. You're almost at a land full of gorgeous women.